You're responsible for the creation of the T. Veronica virus. And now the only existing sample is in your body. I want it. Now!
You want it?
Hey, welcome back to another video. Now this video is going to be my ideas on how I think Capcom should do a Resident Evil Code Veronica remake. Now I know this video has been done before by a lot of different people, but I want to do something a little bit different with it because I have a lot of interesting ideas, especially because I've been replaying the remakes and stuff like that. For the series, I had to be in a different mindset when it comes to what I would do with Claire, story, and stuff like that, because Code Veronica is known for being not as great, but I feel like there's so many things that I could do differently with this remake compared to the OG, and a lot of angles that we can mess around with. Fully aware a lot of people are sick of remakes, but this is the only one I feel like everyone can agree deserves one. Remake could really improve the original, and I do have a few ideas on how. Focusing on the survival horror, fixing the map, the characters, the story itself, and expanding the lore in so many ways. And I might talk about that later in this video. The map being the biggest source of complaint, along with the characters and story, and also focusing on the relationship between Chris and his sister Claire. This taking place after Ori 2, Claire has been on the hunt for Chris for a very long time, and I do feel like we could get an Ori 5 remake that can improve things just as much. It comes down to it, this is the game that does need a remake, and we can have it be a mild progression from Ori 2 for Claire's story. Now, this game could expand on the lore of the founders and also expand it with Chris and stuff like that, where you can learn about Oswald and Marcus, and also the Ashfords especially, because it being their game in a sense, and learn about the lore of the Umbrella Corporation. A little bit more in the betrayal, because that is the biggest theme that I would go for this game, betrayal. Because this is how I think Capcom should do a Code Veronica remake. I have some custom screenshots and gameplay from the fan remake of Code Veronica that was canceled, so full credit goes to them and also myself for some of the stuff that I've made and also what I found online. But getting into characters, Claire, Steve, Chris, and Wesker and Rodrigo. Now, I do see this game having two campaigns, but with a third that kind of connects in between, being Wesker's. Similarly to RE2, you would have Claire's campaign, which would have some Steve segments, or her brother Chris, which you would play later on, and it would kind of connect the ending. So you could play Claire first and then play Chris, kind of similar to RE2. Of course, I'll get into gameplay later, but all the characters would play differently and have different roles. Now, this is a remake, so stuff could be messed around with when it comes to lore, and we can really have some fun. I do kind of want to change up Claire's personality just a little bit in this game, kind of pulling from RE4 remake when it comes to Leon, having her campaign be and her story be a progression. Now, she is seriously dealing with some PTSD from the RE2 remake, and you do get to learn a little bit of her relationship with young Sherry, and she's still taking care of her, even adopting her and kind of being like a mother to her. In this game, I want Claire to be a little bit more aggressive, a lot more. She's been chasing after Chris and always being one step behind, kind of like, in a sense, Sherlock Holmes. And when it comes to the gameplay, I do want it to take notes from RE4, but kind of be a progression of Resident Evil 2, for Claire at least. This game is more survival horror than action horror, like RE4, but it does have those familiar mechanics, but it relies on its survival horror roots. To say we're cutting out the action-oriented stuff, because obviously we're still gonna have it. Hell, Albert Wesker would probably be the best part of the game for most people, but I do feel like we could really take those elements from RE4 but kind of, dial them back, but make them work in a survival horror aspect, which I will get into gameplay later. Now, for Albert Wesker, of course, he would have a small, separate ways-like campaign, but it's more of like a paid DLC thing because I feel like it works best that way. Now, I do want to expand his role and his influence in both campaigns, and expand the reason why he was there, because in Resident Evil 4 Remake, he is trying to get the Plaga sample, but it doesn't work out the way he wants it to completely. But I want to expand on why he's there a little bit more, and what will lead into the Resident Evil 5 Remake when it comes to... I do want to expand RE4 in a sense where it's not just the gameplay, and connect it with that survival horror aspect, but also with the lore. And I think that's what Capcom should do, and they probably are going to do. I feel like RE4 Remake did give us that tease of that, what we're going to get. Because I feel like they're going to progress the game for Code Veronica, taking that piece of it, not just from a lore sense, but from a gameplay sense, to evolve it. And with Claire, Steve, Chris, it makes the most sense to take what we've already had and make it mashed together really good. There's elements of the story when it comes to Chris and stuff like that that really don't work. So with this game, maybe you can add something that wasn't in it. Challenge Claire and Chris's relationship. Have them butt heads. With them both dealing with different versions of an outbreak, I also feel like their philosophy should change a bit, and them butt heads. Even Claire dealing with feelings of almost being abandoned by Chris in some aspect, of him leaving her behind. And it should also be challenged and manipulated, especially by the Ashfords. Claire and Chris are both dealing with some form of PTSD from both events. I also feel like there should be a bit of a challenge. Even though she wants to save her brother or basically find him, there should be a play of resentment towards Chris. That, you kind of abandoned me. I've searched for you and searched for you. When Chris and Claire do meet again, there should be a complication of like almost betrayal. And it should be manipulated as it's like a flip side of the other two siblings of the game, the antagonists. I feel like that should be capitalized on. It's like a flipped coin. Even though Chris and Claire are butting heads, they're a lot more stable compared to the other two siblings. And those two siblings being Alexia and, I can't remember his name, Ashford. And this game should evolve around them just as much, and their depravity. The Ashford family has tortured people, imprisoned people, and this game should really capitalize on the very disturbing angles of Resident Evil, even in its gameplay, which I'm going to get into now. This game does take place in a very cold environment in the Arctic, so I do want to take a gameplay mechanic that I really thought would be interesting, pulling from the body armor mechanic of RE4 Remake and RE4 Classic, and slightly evolving it. Now, making it based more around survival horror, you can have these different Arctic jackets. Now, if you do not have them and you're outside, there would be a cold bar if you're Claire or Steve that would slowly deplete and your health would drain into the point where you die. Only be outside. Basically, you can repair these similar to knives and stuff like that, but if enemies do attack you, it has a limiter, and once these things are destroyed, you can either find more or partially repair it with certain materials you can find. It does add a bit of strategy because these cold environments, not many people can last, and it also evolves the gameplay in a certain extent, taking a mechanic from RE4 and slightly evolving it and changing it and making it a little bit more horror integrated, because I feel like this would add a bit more strategy, especially when it comes to the colder environments later in the game and stuff like that. Similar to how RE1 did the different mechanics and stuff like that, there's always an element of strategy, and I want there to be a bit of an evolvedness when it comes to this game and how it handles certain things. Now, with that mechanic out of the way, how would Claire play? Basically a very evolved version of her RE2 counterpart. The dodge from Resident Evil 3, obviously, because I feel like it best suits her, but slightly changed up a little bit, but also changing up her defensive items, taking a mechanic from Resident Evil 4 Remake, but slightly tweaking it, more about defense compared to else, and that would be the blocking mechanic. Now, if you have a grenade or like this game, we can make Claire a little bit like Leon from RE4, so the block mechanic would be a little different when it comes to the knives. Yes, they would have a durability meter, you can make sure an enemy is downed, but with your knife is more or less a less evolved version of the parry. Now, I don't think this game should have a parry at all, but I do think the knife should still be similar to RE4, but a little bit different. Still taking from the RE2 remake side of things of being durable, but also being able to down enemies and stuff like that. But you also have a block with it. So if you press a button, kind of similar to the parry, you can block attacks like a swipe or basically a bite and basically cut off a zombie's jaw if it's perfectly timed, or basically cut off their arm if they're about to swipe at you. So you can either dodge or basically block enemies. So there's a level of strategy facing them and blocking their attacks, but the risk of, the knife breaking, or basically dodge out of the way and then fire and waste some ammo. This is why I figured this game doesn't need a parry and it could just use a block and similar mechanics to RE4 but a little bit evolved with RE2 is because the enemies in this game are not like the Lost Plagas, but they are still evolved and they're still slow. So kind of keeping within that, I figured a block and a perfect block would be the perfect tools for, Claire to use. And especially with a dodge, it works in tandem. So beyond that, Claire would also have a few tools at her disposal that, other characters do not have. So it actually helps her out in the long run, obviously. Now moving on to everyone's least favorite character, let's move on to Steve. No, not that Steve, but, we still don't like him anyways from freaking Stranger Things. No, this Steve. Steve Burnside. Okay, when it comes to Steve's gameplay, first, we can talk about his character just a little bit. We're going to make him less of a perv and make him kind of like a little brother or a little bit of a romantic interest, a little bit. You want to make him more of a tragic character, a more broken character, kind of pulling from Luis from, RE4 Remake. But I also want to make him more tragic where he's dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, being kidnapped, locked away, and also when you actually have to have him shoot his own father, it's a tragic moment because he's always felt alone, and knowing that his father was out there, maybe he's still alive in this prison, but finding out he's dead and you have to kill him really would drive someone insane or make them a little bit scared. Kind of similar to Clementine and Lee. It's in between, but we can kind of slightly tweak some stuff, obviously. But when it comes to his gameplay, I feel like making him a little bit like Carlos, but a little bit more like Leon, just like a combination of the two gameplay-wise could work. Where he's a lot more quicker, agile, uses more heavy fire rate weapons where they're more quicker to take down enemies and stuff like that, makes the most sense. He would still have a dodge mechanic, but it's a lot more easier to perform and it's more of a dodge roll. So similar to the RE3 remake, but a lot more easier. He would not have a block mechanic. Instead, I thought of something a little bit more interesting. Using his own guns and quickness to an advantage, or grabbed by a zombie, instead of just aiming to break free, you can use your gun to shoot it through the head. I don't really know what to do to replace the block mechanic for Steve. I do want it to be more about him being quick and using his guns and stuff like that. So I personally think he should have sub-items, and I don't know if giving him a knife would work. We could bring back like the taser and stuff like that, but I honestly really have no idea on the other mechanics for him, because I feel like he should be a lot more quicker and other stuff. So yeah, we're going to get into our final character of this video, and then we're going to finally get into enemies and finish the video off. And that is Chris Boulder Punching Redfield. All right. Now, I personally think that we could just use a little bit of the Not a Hero DLC gameplay, mix it with Carlos, and call it a day. But I do feel like this would be a good point to have Chris play a little bit similar to Leon, but a little bit more evolved, using his brute strength and wits to really get around things. That should really evolve with his gameplay, being more militaristic and not just a cop anymore. and more of like an agent, I feel like the dodge mechanic could be a lot more evolved, especially with him, having even a triple perfect dodge. Now, that would be difficult to perform, but his levels would be remotely harder than the other ones. And him being more militaristic, he would have more faster but harder guns. Now, I do think we could evolve his gameplay with the block mechanic also being a parry and stuff like that, similar to RE4 Remake. Kinda did want to rethink that, and I actually had the idea evolving around mercenaries from RE8, his kind of strength-based punching mechanic. Now, I did want to evolve this a little bit around boxing in a sense, where he can basically counter an attack or block it, putting both hands up briefly. Similar to Ethan from RE7. Now, I did think that would be cool, but it doesn't work as well in a 3D gameplay. So I'm very torn on how to operate the block mechanic for Chris. I did want to give him more machetes versus knives, but I don't know. I'm very 50-50. I obviously think Chris would be a very interesting addition, gameplay-wise and story-wise, with a lot of potential of what you can do with him, being a more militaristic character. So there is that. And now I want to get into enemies. Now, there are some familiar enemies, as we all know, zombies, and also some new ones. So I do think we can really mess around with the different enemies of this game, evolving them, especially the Bandersnatch and a few other ones. Someone who's not played Code Veronica, I feel like we can amp up the survival horror with the enemies, giving us different variations that kind of do things a bit differently, similar to RE2, but on steroids. Now, I do think we could have hybrid enemies with basically zombies mixed with plants, kind of similar to the IVs, but a lot different. So, the Veronica virus does evolve a bit with plants and a little bit of bugs, so we can kind of mess around with that concept, giving us some hybrid zombies and really making the zombies be a little bit more aggressive and changing up the mechanics with them ever so slightly. As for the Bandersnatch, this would be the more dangerous of the enemies. Basically, if you think you can escape by running up some steps, it could just grab and launch itself up there and then basically attack you, either forcing you into a dodge situation or a block situation, or a head-on fight. Basically, this would be a more ranged-based enemy, but in a different sense. Snatch can grab you. Basically, if you try to run away from it, it can grab up to basically where it thinks you're going to go, or it can grab you from a long distance and stuff like that. So it's more of a long-ranged enemy of being able to catch up with you or grab you. So it's a lot more of a pain to deal with this time around, really challenging you and to really think outside the box of how to deal with it. Of course, we will have some brand new enemies and evolved old enemies when it comes down to it, some being more plant-based, bug-based, and stuff like that. We'll also have the return of the tyrants, so of course we're going to have to evolve them ever so slightly. Making them still similar to Mr. X, but a little bit different, because of course you can actually take these damn things down for good. So they're not really the stalkers of the game. Of course, we're going to evolve a lot of different enemies, so of course we'll evolve the Nosferatu and a lot of the more creepier enemies, and kind of base it in that survival horror, tortured creations and stuff like that. Kind of similar to RE8 with Heisenberg's factory. But we're also going to expand the lore of the biggest enemies of the game being the Ashford twins. Of course, we might tweak the T. Veronica virus's lore just ever so slightly to basically have it evolve a little bit more and expand the role of it in going into an RE5 remake and its impact on Ouroboros. You also kind of want to flesh it out a little bit more in the lore of it and expand it just ever so slightly. But I also, with this game, do want to have a theme of betrayal. Now, I'm fully aware that that theme has been done a little bit in RE0, and yes, that game could use a remake as well, but I feel like it works better a little bit more in this game, because betrayal circulates this game. The Ashfords betray one another in a sense, like, you know, Alexia betraying her father technically betraying her, and also technically the founders betraying one another. Betrayal has always been technically a theme, you know, since Marcus died, but I feel like it should be more of a theme in this game, even on the protagonist side of things, with a betrayal of trust between Claire and Chris. A little bit of a betrayal when it comes to, you know, feelings, like when it comes to like Steve and stuff like that. Betrayal should be a mainstay theme of this game anyways, so yeah. Also, in expanding Alexia's lore, I do want her to be a little bit more manipulative, kind of taking an Alex Wesker type approach with her, just ever so slightly, but also getting to see how powerful she really is, and how dangerous the T. Veronica virus really is in a sense. Getting to expand that lore and show us what we could really see in when it comes to like a boss fight or stuff like that. Speaking of boss fights, we can get into that now. Obviously, we will get upgraded versions of boss fights with some interesting mechanics and stuff like that. Even getting us an upgraded version of the Nosferatu boss fight, with some slightly different mechanics, heavily tweaking it, but also we could, you know, have different boss fights with the twins, and maybe some new bosses thrown in there. Maybe one with Rodrigo. Who knows? We can kind of expand his role slightly, kind of like how Tyrell's role was expanded slightly in the remake. So the rewrite for Resident Evil 3 Remake is coming together very slowly. Eventually, I might release a trailer or a teaser for it again, so keep an eye out for that. But shameless shilling out of the way. Getting back into boss fights, there's not really a whole lot. Repeating myself too much, there's not really a whole lot that I can add. I did have a slight idea though for the Alexia Ashford fight. I do think instead of just having a cutscene of Wesker fighting her, it should be its own boss battle. And then it would end kind of abruptly, and then Chris would be forced to fight her at her more weakened state and finish her off. Because that's kind of typical of Wesker. Where he would kind of take a sample of her without her even realizing it and run off. Leave Chris to finish the job, obviously, because that's typical. But I also think expanding Wesker's role to kind of being not just someone behind the scenes and in the shadows, but also manipulating Claire. Now, I probably should explain this point, but in the OG, Claire knew who Wesker was, but she already knew he was bad, which is a little bit odd because she's been searching for her brother for so long. I wanted to fix that with this remake and kind of change a lot of certain plot threads around. But with Wesker's role, I wanted him to be a little more, not just in the shadows, but manipulative, taking something from the OG RE1 and kind of applying it here. In Code Veronica Original, she knew that he was bad somehow. I don't know how, even though she's been searching for her brother for so long and all that stuff, and it kind of made no sense. Now, I feel like with this, we can slightly tweak and mess around with stuff. I feel like with Wesker having small encounters with Claire, he could kind of get on her good side, helping her out and using her in a sense, the same way he used her brother or Jill, kind of manipulating her and kind of creating more of a rift between her and her brother in a sense. Because when she does find Chris, it's more of like a sadder reunion because it's like he's manipulated her into thinking certain things about her brother. Not really making her hate him in a way, but kind of creating more of a rift of bitterness and amplifying feelings of abandonment in a way. Even using her to find out certain information, even finding out more about what happened to Sherry Birkin, which might surprise him slightly. Of course, near the end, Claire would find out about Wesker's true motive and also find out what he's done. It would kind of be in a similar place to her brother from the first game, you know, being betrayed, kind of used in a sense. So that would be kind of Wesker's role with Claire, like slightly tweaking things to be more of an Ada-like presence in the shadows, but sometimes he'll help and guide you through certain sections, doing stuff to help you, but really in a way using every character and just to get what he truly wants. Obviously, on the opposite end, his relationship with Chris would be less cartoony and be more of a rivalry in a sense, where it's not going to be like RE5 levels of hatred, but it's going to get there slightly, where it's like, you keep getting in my way. You know, it's a slight frustration. It would be more like Ra's al Ghul and Batman levels of things. Of course, these are just some of my ideas of how I would tweak certain things, because the story is the main thing I know a lot of people want to tweak, because it does feel very disjointed and doesn't feel very connected in a way. And with RE4, they did kind of make the game a lot more serious, but it actually had more of a story compared to the original. So I feel like they could do the same with this game. Now, I will say I feel like we could better suit certain things and expand certain aspects. So if you guys want to see a story video where how I would write the remake of Code Veronica, then let me know in the comments down below if you guys want to actually see that. Make sure to share this video. It actually would really help me right now, especially because the algorithm has not been recommending a lot of the videos on this channel, sadly. And also make sure to like this video, share it around, and check out some of my other videos on the channel where I do some different branching content. Or check out my main channel where sometimes I stream some video games, I do some art, and stuff like that. Because I do plan on maybe doing a stream playing through the original Code Veronica. So check that out, then go over there and subscribe. It honestly would help me out a ton. I'm trying to get to 200k over there, and I'm trying to get to 100 over here, so, well, yeah. But enough with the shilling. I really appreciate all the support. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and really kind of liking some of these idea-based videos. It does really mean a lot to me that people like this type of stuff, so thank you so much. That anyone kind of likes my crazy ideas, it does mean a lot to me. So, again, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really means a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, afternoon, or night. Peace out. Bye-bye.